All right, our next speaker is Ruizhe. Ruizhe is an assistant professor at Stanford.
Okay, hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about how fast should a blockchain be. It's a joint work with Shihao from SMU, and we really appreciate Flashbot, Bragg, Christian for all the feedbacks. So let's start with the trend. The blockchain is getting quicker and quicker, right? We have Ethereum, which is around 10 seconds. We have Base, used to be around 2 seconds, and everything with Flashblock around 200 milliseconds. So it seems that it's not another question, should blockchain be quicker and quicker? Because people always argue that if you have a quicker blockchain, you have shorter wait, you have a better experience, you have better execution, you have more activity. It seems a no-brainer. But I want to tell you, maybe it's not the case. First of all, I want to tell you, if you won't forget everything in the talk, there's one thing you want to remember is quicker blockchain not only change how quick a transaction will land, also change the priority ordering on a blockchain. So if you have a slow blockchain, think you have a tourist bus, which go every 30 minutes. And if you own the best seat on that bus, you will have to pay for that. So that's what happens for a slow blockchain. The priority fee decide which part of the block you're at. And then if you think about you have a tourist bus that go every 10 milliseconds, then it's pretty much empty. You go whenever you want, and you can sit whatever you want. So that's when blockchain becomes quicker and quicker. Your transaction, if you're only millisecond quicker, you may land a block per to another block, and you may not have to pay higher fees. So you should really think block speed is spectrum. If you're really slow, it really depends on how much priority you're paying. If you're really quick, it really depends on how quick you are. So that's the mechanism you want to remember if you forget everything. So, but then in financial markets, priority is everything. Because if you change priority rule, it affects the users. When there are transactions, how good their trade will be, affect liquidity provider incentive because it depends on how we're going to provide liquidities. It decide the arbitrager researchers, and also decide the exchange or the other layer, which is blockchain, how much fee they earn. So in financial market, priority rules everything. And I want to show you two motivations or two stories. One's from someone's experience, someone's from our data to tell you why this can go either ways. So eventually you realize that when you look at financial market, there are so many things you want to answer. For example, how much a trade has to wait? Do you get a better price? And is the liquidity better? And everything, like do you have higher volume? Do you collect more fees? But then let's look at first thing. We know Base blockchain. Base used to be 2 seconds per block, and then they introduced something called Flash block. What happens is they chop a block into 10 different small blocks, which is around 200 milliseconds. Then you want to guess when blockchain becomes quicker, what happens? Base would think that they'll have better revenue, but what do you think? So what happens really after Base introduced this Flash block used to be for people are arbitragers, like 50 or 55% of the fees actually goes to the sequencers. So they pay high fees to secure the prioritizations. But after that, they don't pay fees. Around 90% of the arbitrage profit retained by the arbitragers. So for a blockchain, if you introduce a faster blockchain, you may not necessarily get more share of the profit. But you think that may be beneficial for liquidity or everything else, right? Maybe because of quicker blockchain, people have better execution. Maybe it's still worthwhile if you have better experience. But it also is not actually true because think about if you buy 1 Ethereum, I hope 1 Ethereum is not $100, then you have to pay certain costs, right? You have to pay slippage, fees, and everything. So let's see how the transaction or the cost has evolved after you introduce this Flash block. So what happens is, used to be if you trade 1 ETH, it's around 0.17 bips after the fees. But the moment you have this Flash block, you realize that liquidity is much thinner and eventually you have to pay way more. So which means that after you have Flash block, you thought there'll be more liquidity, but actually the liquidity becomes thinner, you have to pay more. So it seems that quicker block is not necessarily good. But Maya will say different. Maya's PhD graduated from doing microstructure, and then she was dropped on island, and she was trying to figure out how to make money by trading cryptos. So the first thing she learned was maybe she should do a market maker on Uniswap v3, which means you have to choose a range and put liquidity there. And then what happens is, oh, she also learned in the other book, eventually you know that providing liquidity in a V3 pool is pretty much, if you have a narrow range, it means you provide liquidity closer to the current mean call, which is the AMM price. And if you have a bigger range, it means that you provide liquidity further. And then, so what happens is, what's the fee? Fee is the half spread, which means that every time you do a trade, you have to pay that half spread. So Maya first tried Ethereum because everyone knows Ethereum, and they thought it was a good place because there are a lot of flows. So let's see what happens. Maya put liquidity in the pool, and Ethereum has a really slow block. Eventually, the price on Binance drift, and after 10 seconds, 12 seconds, the drift is typically pretty large. Eventually, that exceeds the half spread, which is a fee. And what happens is the arbitrator will come in because they can buy something which is a much cheaper price after the fees for something already worth more. So they can do an arbitrage on Maya's liquidity, right? So what happens is they see the AMM price is really stale, and the fee is not that high, and compared to the price deviation, and they realize prices drift somewhere else, they can do an arbitrage. So Maya is pretty sad, and Maya wonder if we can just withdraw their liquidity before this happens. And you realize that there are arbitrageurs bidding with you, and they're at the same block because everything's 12 seconds, and very likely you're landing on the same block. And then what happens is they're willing to pay higher price than you because they can arbitrage the whole pool while you only own a share of pool. So their valuation is much higher. So there's nothing Maya can do, and Maya's pretty sad. So she left Ethereum. And they realized there is some blockchain called Base. So what happens on Base is, okay, so the price drift. But it's fun. Within 2 seconds, even before the price has reached to that threshold, like Maya realized that I can just withdraw all my liquidity within those 2 seconds before arbitrage opportunity has even happened. And after I withdraw, okay, maybe after the next block, price drift again, there's arbitrage opportunity, but I'm already safe. I don't care because my transaction already pulled all my liquidity away. So Maya is happily making market on Base and not on Ethereum. So you can see a shorter block potentially can make liquidity provider more HFT-like join blockchain. And Maya is even happier when the blockchain Base become quicker and quicker. So what happens is she realized that when blockchain become 200 milliseconds, she can earn way more money, she has way more market shares, but she's just paying more AWS fees, sequencer, and everything. So eventually she realized that it's really better for her, but she doesn't pay any more fee, but she pays more infrastructures. So hopefully you remember 2 stories I just gave you. First is Base, after they adopt this quicker blockchains, quicker block speed, what happens is the sequencer doesn't earn more money, and people's or users' execution quality doesn't go up. On the other hand, from market maker perspective, they're pretty happy because now they have a really good place they can market make instead of just always suffer from the arbitrage. And the quicker, the better for them. So why you have those 2 conflict image, which is someone's happy, they seem to be willing to provide more liquidity, but actually the quality is bad. So this is why we do this paper. So we first have a theory thing. I will go really quick. I don't want to be technical here. So you can imagine, as I just showed you, that price will change. Eventually, you have an AMM price, you have a Binance price. Those things have a wedge. Typically, it means that the model has 2 arbitrageurs, and they're targeting on this same pool of money. And then whenever the arbitrage opportunity happens, they will fire arbitrage orders and try to trade here. And also, you have liquidity providers. There is someone more active, like Maya. She's trying to withdraw her liquidity whenever the price actually doesn't look good, so she can pour her money out. And the other people are more like the normal Uniswap users. They just put all their money in the pool, and they never care. And then they just hope for good luck. And eventually, whenever arbitrage happens, they get arbitraged. So those are the 4 players, or 3 different players in our model. So the first thing you should know is this game just happens every time. So whenever a block happens, you have a price, and there may be information arrives, and then the arbitrager will try to arbitrage, the liquidity provider will try to withdraw their money. So this game just happens block after block. And then after they send their transactions, sequencer try to see all the transactions sent to the sequencer and arrange them, right? So that you can see this game just plays over and over again. So the first thing, again, remember the mechanism I showed in the beginning. If you have a really slow blockchain, what's going to happen? It means that very likely 2 arbitrageurs' transaction will land in the same block. That means they have to bid rather high priority fees to secure the position to take that arbitrage opportunities, right? However, and then that's the case where sequencer actually get benefit from that because people are bidding. Eventually, all the profit from the arbitrage just goes to the sequencer. Whereas if you have two arbitragers in a very quick blockchains, say it's 10 millisecond, 5 millisecond, whatever it is, very likely the two arbitrage trade because a little bit difference in network delay or randomizations, eventually the arbitrage A and B will land on different blocks, which means that priority fees means nothing then. It all depends on who is quicker or not. So eventually you can see when you become faster and faster, arbitragers don't bid fees. So that's the first thing we get from the model. So the second thing is, for liquidity providers, they're happier if you have a faster block, if you're active, because if for slow blockchains, what happens is when you have an arbitrage happens, it's very likely to happen within 2 seconds compared to 200 milliseconds. Then you have to compete with arbitragers, and very likely you'll lose. But however, for 200 millisecond block, what happens is you have more time in those green region to do some action to pull your liquidity out. And once you pull your liquidity out, like there's nothing to do with you, right? The arbitrage may happen a few blocks later, and you already pull your liquidity out. So faster blocks is good for those active market makers. But the faster eventually means that people's success depends on their speed. They actually pay more for their speed, which you can think about AWS cost, where we're just spamming the RPC point and so on. And more importantly, there's one more person we're missing here, which is those passive people, or just the majority of people currently in Uniswap. I mean, they're in the pool all the time, so they're still going to suffer all the arbitrage loss. So their arbitrage loss doesn't change. But because Maya has joined the pool, what happens there, their share of fees will drop because the Maya is now sharing the fee stream with them. And eventually, they're going to have less fees and more cost same cost from being arbitraged. And what happens is one day it's called cream skimming. Think about coffee, you can take the cream and then the rest is the bitter coffee. So eventually at some point, if the blockchain becomes too quick, they'll drop off. They'll be just crowded out by those HFTs. So we have some predictions. For example, the priority bidding goes much lower once you have quicker blockchains. And the blockchain's sequencer's fee share or bidder's fee share or validator fee share will drop a lot. And also, the arbitrager will be better off because they gain more shares. That's the first prediction we have. Second thing is there's going to be more balancing activity. There will be more active market making, and there will be less adverse select-down, which means that they'll lose less money per trade. And then what happens next is the market quality does not necessarily go up because you can imagine that when you have one active market maker, which may crowd out all the passive market maker, you may not necessarily have more liquidity in the end, which means that people's trade may be worse off, right? So you want to see if that's really true in data. And you have a really good data, which is Base blockchain, right? Around July 2025, they changed from 2 seconds to 200 milliseconds. And you also want to compare to a control group. The best control group would be Optimism. But they're pretty shallow, they're poor, they don't have much trading opportunities. So we just use Arbitrum, which don't change much along the way. But you should realize Arbitrum is not priority, they have a speed boost. So what happens is, think about Base and Arbitrum, they have trade before that. And both are around 2 seconds. And then, one is 2 seconds, one is 250 milliseconds. And after the change of the block speed, Base become much quicker. And we want to see, compared to Arbitrum, what happened on Base. The first thing is you have to identify some arbitragers, right? So the arbitrager are the people who bring DEX price close to the Binance price. So those are arbitragers. And you also want to identify some kind of what we call active market makers, which are like just Maya. They are just put more liquidity in, pull it out very frequently. You can see their footprint from their behaviors. So you have active LPs, you have arbitrager, and you have the rest of pools. And let's see what happens to them. So the first thing is we want to see how their P&L changed. And second thing we want to see is how the whole market quality changed. The first thing is, as I explained to you, people don't pay gas anymore. Because for a 200 millisecond block, you just want to be quicker. You just want do collocation with AWS, put your server in the proper rooms, it doesn't make any sense to pay fees because it doesn't depend, your lending has nothing to do with how much fee you pay. So you can see that for those arbitrage, which you typically pay a lot of fees, their priority bidding has dropped a lot, which is why the sequencer is earning less, which is why people are thinking about that, right? Base is thinking about that. Second thing is, what happens to arbitragers? I mean, my model is saying the arbitrager would be better off, but people actually see that per trade, they're earning less. But isn't that contradictory? Actually, it's not, because they actually save a lot from the fees they're paying to the blockchain. So their cost of business goes down a lot, so they can afford to do those small arbitrage. And overall, they're earning way more money compared to before. So arbitrager is better off because they pay less fees. That's the second thing, their P&L goes up. Third thing is, the active LPs are balancing way more. You can see that purely, a lot of time, a position will last for 4 seconds before they burn a position to create. But now, a lot of time, even around, just within the same block, they already have a mint and burn, which means they do a lot of way more active makings. And you can see sometimes they already be able to pull their liquidity in the same block before the arbitragers. So this is what leads to the second one, which is you can see that if you look at all the trade those market makers are doing, they're doing much less toxic trade, which is around a lot of time when the position is actually, you can see that the trade doesn't move them to the more toxic directions. And then either because they already pull early, or just overall they suffer less from those arbitrage because they already pull their liquidity much more actively. So LPs suffer less from adverse actions. So what that means? It means that active LPs are earning way more money. They used to be just flat-ish, or a little bit money, and after flash block, they're just become a much more profitable business. They're earning money around 90% of days, and they're earning around 1.28 bips. So LP is better, and then the pool, because you can think arbitrager has less cost of business, they're doing less small arbitrage to align the price, you can think the pool price align Binance with the efficient price more closely. But then for other people, you should care about what's your execution quality, right? So you realize the first thing is the pool become 20% thinner because all those passive people have already dropped out. So you can imagine you have more HFT, like liquidity provider on base, and then what happens to those people who are passive, they realize their profit goes down more and more, they lose more money, and eventually the overall depth of the market has dropped. And what's the consequence? The consequence, as I showed you in the before, apart from the fee you pay, the slippage is much higher for the same set of the trade. So people's execution quality actually goes down, even though market maker is earning more money. And more importantly, you can see that the active LPs just have way more concentration, and they're having more time in the pool, and they have more share in terms of liquidity in the pool. So, and you can see the trading volume of base also goes down, which if you have worse price, and eventually this may not be the optimal venue to trade, and the volume actually goes down. So eventually, we see those mixed results, right? The money, where the money went to, the priority bidding goes down a lot, and then the blockchain doesn't extract that money as much as before from the MEV supply chain. But then the active LP is better, they're earning more money, arbitrage is better off, and the aligned price better. But from the whole pool perspective, even though the price is aligned better, but eventually, because of crimp skimming, because of the HFT is kind of crowding out the passive LPs, the execution quality actually goes down. So eventually, when we think about the whole thing about if you're faster, did it reward everyone? You can think about, you really should just think about, it's really about priority. Everything's about priority. And after you change to a quicker blockchain, the fee doesn't go to the blockchain, and everyone is paying a lot for those unobservable infrastructure costs. AWS and a lot of things will just be absorbed out of the blockchain system. So the whole system is also leaking money out to more infra investment. So the takeaway is slow blockchains, the active LP has more exposures, the fee is more extracted by the blockchain itself, which may not be ideal, and they're more trapped in 10 seconds and they can't do anything. But when you become quicker and quicker, the active LP have edge, it's also not kind of optimal for the whole blockchain because you're going to crowd out all those passive people. And also you have a lot of invisible investment in infrastructures. So I think still, to me, where in the theory we can see there is optimal in between, but if you're building a layer 1 or something, or layer 2, and if you really optimize for trading, you should really think this carefully, right? What kind of mechanism you want, make sure the financial activity is still live and people get a benefit from that. And that's it, thank you.
Thanks for the talk. I have a question. So how much of this observed effects of reducing block time is because of we're just replicating the same auction mechanism from like a 12-second block down to 200 milliseconds? And have you studied like alternative approaches such as arbitrum time boost, which is quite different because it's just effectively a speed bump rather than like an auction per block? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's for Arbitrum, I didn't study very carefully, but we constantly have communication with Flashbot, and they also realize that on Arbitrum is not very, like there are 2 or 3 people on the time boost. It's not actually that efficient in terms of computation. And also we talk with off-chain labs on basically also think about, so people are, I think the 2 mechanism is, we also talk with Base, like I think 2 mechanism, they're currently not really a consensus which one's better and which is better off. I think they all have their drawbacks. And for this, yeah, I think even what is the optimal one, I actually don't know because eventually, it's an empirical question.
It can be subjective, right? It's like a zero-sum game. It just depends on who.
And also, like, it's if you think about it, it's fun. The sequencer is earning less, but if you can have, like, maybe the prop AMM on Base will make things better and so on. So, like, I don't know. Eventually, if they're platform, they should optimize way more things. And maybe like they sacrifice a little bit from the rent, but they can make the whole platform better off. So maybe I don't know if that's what you asked for, but I'm a little bit everywhere. I feel.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi. So on this very slide that we're looking at now, so you're an academic, so you gave a very, nuanced perspective. Okay, it's a market design problem. The parameter of slots, time could be, we should be very careful about the different actors and so on, but can I elicit more like a punchy statement? So what is the optimal slot time? If Base comes to you and ask you, was this change a good change? What would you tell them? And what should we do?
I don't know, actually, because I think if you just isolate this market, I think is maybe not 200. If you just isolate the current Base, maybe it's not 200 milliseconds, also not 2 seconds, maybe somewhere in between. But on the other hand, I think if they're not only for Uniswap or only for V3, like the platform should be optimizing for everything on top of that. Then if you take everything into consideration, I just have no idea what is the optimal.
Okay, that's bad. But it's the honest answer. I like it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's my honest answer. Yeah.
So one question I wonder, first of all, great talk. I've never seen this. We were often blamed as the people who are advocating for longer blocks and kind of being told, hey, we're just holding back all this liquidity. And often we'd make like a geographic decentralization argument for why the blocks should be longer, but it's super interesting to see a market quality argument. So I wonder, like, active LP tends to be a pretty concentrated market. At least that's what we see empirically in most of these chains venues. There's 1 to maybe 3 participants. Do you see any like design that maybe makes this more democratic, or do you think that's just inherent to the fact that it's latency sensitive, it's fairly concentrating?
I think it's first very latency. So there are 3 things, right? So I think for market making, it's going to be very centralized eventually. There are 3 things. First is latency, as you say, like how good their infra is. But also you realize that when you move to bigger market where, for example, then your predictive power also matters. Do you have the ability to predict return or have a better fair price, it matters a lot. And those normally is an advantage for traditional market makers. And also if you can think about there's a lot of synergy, right? If you see the order flows or you at least connect to the WebSocket for all the exchange and so on, you definitely can predict the short-term return a little bit better. So it's really I think there is a synergy on the trading business for different venues. And there is a lot of things which is like how do you manage inventory, and because AMM things are spot tradings. So if you are connected to more than one venues, it's much easier to like get rid of inventory and a lot of things. So all three together, you can see there is economic of scale, and there are kind of what's it called, specialization in predicting and execution, which is alpha and monetization. There is also economic scale on how you manage inventory and so on. So I think overall, for everything very active, no matter prop AMM or just LP on decent exchanges, it's going to be very centralized eventually.
Cool, thank you.
All right, let's thank the speaker.